You want me to, take a sample, or
Yeah, I want you to move away from the table.
should I call someone?
Call everyone.
What if the scariest thing about a pandemic isn't the virus? It's not the death toll. It's not the hospitals overflowing or the scientists racing against time. It's what happens to us, who we become when everything we trust falls away. 3 films, made years apart by different directors with completely different visions, but together they form something none of them could alone. A map of how civilization unravels and what we might find at the bottom. This is the Pandemic Trilogy. Outbreak from 1995, Contagion from 2011, and Blindness from 2008. Now, you might think you know what pandemic movies are about. A deadly virus, a race for a cure, maybe some explosions. And look, one of these films has that. But the other 2, they're interested in something else entirely. Because here's what these 3 filmmakers understood years before any of us lived through a real pandemic. The disease is never really the point. Outbreak shows us what we want to believe, that heroes exist, that someone's coming to save us. Contagion shows us what actually happens, the systems, the fear, the impossible logistics of keeping millions of people alive. And Blindness? Blindness shows us what's left when all of that fails. Watch them in this order, and you're not just watching 3 pandemic movies, you're watching hope itself slowly drain away. And what remains might be the most important thing any of them have to say. Let's start where most of us start when we think about deadly viruses, with the fantasy that someone's going to fix it. Outbreak stars Dustin Hoffman as an army virologist, basically the guy you want on your side when something terrifying jumps from a monkey to a human in a small California town. And what unfolds is, well, it's an action movie. And I don't mean that dismissively. Director Wolfgang Petersen, the same guy who made Das Boot and In the Line of Fire, knows exactly what he's doing here. The virus is fast, the stakes are immediate, and the tension comes from watching one determined man fight not just the disease, but the people above him who might have other plans. What Outbreak captures, and what felt almost quaint rewatching it recently, is this belief that pandemics are problems with solutions. Find patient zero, identify the host, synthesize a cure, stop the bad guys, save the town. It's pandemic as solvable puzzle, and in 1995, that felt reasonable. The emotional takeaway is almost comforting. Yes, the situation is dire. Yes, people die. But human courage and competence win. The system bends, but good people straighten it. Hold on to that feeling, because it's about to get complicated. Contagion came out in 2011, and if you rewatched it in 2020 like millions of people did, you already know. This movie feels less like a film and more like a documentary someone sent back in time. Steven Soderbergh approaches Pandemic completely differently than Outbreak. There's no single hero. Instead, there are systems, the CDC, the WHO, local governments, hospitals, all trying to do their jobs while facing something they weren't built for. The genius of Contagion is its restraint. The virus isn't supernatural. It doesn't have a secret military origin. It's just a mutation, the kind of thing that happens. And the horror isn't the disease itself, it's watching the machinery of civilization struggle to keep up. But here's what stuck with me on rewatch. One character, played by Jude Law, spreads misinformation for profit, and in 2011 that subplot felt almost secondary, almost like a side note. In 2020, it felt like the main event. Contagion shifts the question from who will save us to how do we function when the systems we depend on are overwhelmed. The answer isn't heroes, it's logistics, supply chains, communication, the boring, essential infrastructure we never think about until it fails. The hope here is different, grimmer. The hope is that systems adapt, that we muddle through, that eventually some kind of normal returns. But what if it doesn't? Blindness. This isn't an easy film. I want to say that up front. Director Federico Meirelles, the same filmmaker behind City of God, isn't interested in comfort. He's interested in truth. And the truth here is brutal. The premise is an epidemic of blindness sweeps through an unnamed city. Not darkness, whiteness, a milky, disorienting void. The afflicted are quarantined in an abandoned facility, and one woman, played by Julianne Moore, keeps her sight but enters the quarantine to stay with her husband. What follows is a descent. Not into disease, but into us. The film asks, strip away everything that organizes human society, law, commerce, medicine, even the ability to see each other, and what remains? What are we actually, when no one's watching and no help is coming? Meirelles doesn't flinch from the answer. There's cruelty in this film, genuine darkness. But there's also, and this is what makes it essential rather than just punishing, there's also grace, small acts of kindness, impossible loyalty, the stubborn refusal to let go of humanity even when every incentive points the other way. This is pandemic as moral reckoning. The virus, if we can even call it that, isn't the antagonist. We are. And the hope, if there is any, isn't that someone saves us. It's that we might somehow save ourselves. So why these three films? Why in this order? Because together they tell a story none of them could tell alone. Watch Outbreak, and you believe in heroes, in individual courage overcoming impossible odds. That's the story we want. Watch Contagion, and you believe in systems, in the grinding, imperfect machinery of civilization doing its job. That's the story we live. Watch Blindness, and you stop believing in anything external at all. You're forced to ask what's left when everything fails, and heroes fail, and systems collapse. That's the story we fear. But here's what emerges from watching all three. The pandemic was never the point. In Outbreak, the virus is a villain to defeat. In Contagion, it's a stress test for society. In Blindness, it barely matters. It's just the mechanism that removes everything we hide behind. What these films are really about are exposure. Not to disease, but to ourselves. Each one strips away another layer of protection, our heroes, our institutions, our civilization itself, until we're left with the only question that matters. When everything fails, who are we? And the trilogy's answer, taken together, is strangely hopeful. Not because it promises rescue, but because even in blindness, even at the absolute bottom, there are people who choose kindness, who refuse to let go of humanity. That's not a guarantee. It's a possibility, and sometimes that's enough. Now, if this trilogy has you wanting to go deeper, and I mean really deep into how these scenarios start, I have one more recommendation. The Hot Zone. It's a limited series from 2019, starring Juliana Margulies, based on Richard Preston's terrifying non-fiction book about an Ebola outbreak in a Washington, D.C. suburb. In 1989, this actually happened. Where our trilogy explores what pandemics do to society, The Hot Zone asks how do they start? And the answer is often quietly, in places no one's paying attention, until suddenly everyone is. It's streaming on various platforms, worth searching for. Consider it the prequel energy to everything we've discussed today. That's the pandemic trilogy. Outbreak, Contagion, Blindness. 3 films that understood something about us, long before we had to live it. If this changed how you think about these movies, or about pandemic stories in general, subscribe and leave a comment. Which film in this trilogy hit hardest for you? I'm genuinely curious. Next week, we're exploring another unofficial trilogy. 3 films that deal with resilience in unforgiven circumstances, and how you survive when you are completely alone. I'll see you then.